The rain fell in thin, relentless sheets over Mexico City. Mark huddled deeper into his makeshift shelter, constructed from faded tarps and rotting wood. The cold seeped into his bones, a chill that seemed to echo the loneliness that had consumed him for 2 years, ever since Laura, his wife, had passed away. The memory of her soft skin, her smile, was a sharp knife in his heart. It hurt so much that he preferred the numbness of the icy rain. He watched the drops race down the top, each a tiny mirror reflecting the darkness in his eyes. The city rumbled in the distance, a sound indifferent to his pain. The smell of sewage mixed with the wet rain filled his nostrils, a familiar perfume of his new reality. He had no money for food, nor for medicine for the aches that haunted him. The only thing he possessed was his skill with machines, a skill that now seemed as useless as life itself. A muffled bang broke the silence. Mark jumped. A luxury car, a gleaming monster of metal and glass, stopped abruptly a few feet from his shelter. The engine groaned, an agonizing sound that seemed all too familiar. The sound of a machine begging for help. He hesitated. It wasn't his concern. He was used to remaining invisible, to withdrawing from the world. The car door opened, revealing a woman, tall, elegant, in a fur coat that violently contrasted with his precarious shelter. Her face, despite the impeccable makeup, expressed a fragility that touched him somehow. It was a distorted mirror of his own pain. "I need help," she said, her voice hoarse, almost a whisper lost in the fury of the rain. She seemed helpless, as lost as he was. For a moment Mark saw himself reflected in her eyes, drowned in a sadness that transcended wealth and luxury. He wanted to turn away, to hide again in his shell of pain. But something, a tiny spark, stopped him. "What happened?" he asked, his voice raspy from dehydration and disuse. The woman looked at him, her eyes shining with a mixture of hope and despair. "My car broke down. I don't know what to do." The rain intensified, and the woman shrank, as if the rain itself had found her and struck her deeper than her mechanical breakdown. It was such a fragile image, so contrary to the imposing nature of her car, that Mark felt a slight tremor of compassion, a tremor he hadn't felt in a long time. A tiny thread of hope, as thin as a spiderweb, began to form within him. The rain poured down, turning the street into a muddy river. Mark and the woman, Sophia, took refuge under the small, makeshift awning of the shelter. The silence, broken only by the incessant drumming of the water, was heavy. He watched her, huddled in her silk coat, a surreal image of fragility amidst the misery. Her impeccable clothes, once a symbol of wealth, now seemed inadequate armor against nature's fury. "Are you all right?" Mark asked, his voice softer than he expected. Sophia nodded, her lips trembling. "My phone's dead, and I don't know how to get home." Her voice shook, not just from the cold, but also from a fear that shone in her eyes. Mark felt uncomfortable with the proximity. Her wealth, the expensive perfume, her soft skin, everything was so different from his world of dust and sweat. But the rain united them, trapped them in that small space, creating a forced intimacy. He huddled closer, trying to shield himself from the cold and the intrusion of this woman into his world. "People sleep here every night," Mark said, breaking the silence, pointing to the few mattresses scattered under the awning. "If you want." Sophia looked at the shelter, at the people sleeping there covered in worn-out cloths. The clash of worlds was evident. Her gaze fixed on a child sleeping hugged to a threadbare blanket, the innocence on its face contrasting with the harshness of the setting. An almost imperceptible smile touched her lips. I've never seen anything like this," she murmured, her voice barely audible. Mark observed her gaze, trying to understand what was going on in the mind of this rich, lost woman. He hesitated, then, in an unexpected impulse, shared a bit of his story, his voice low and hoarse. He spoke of his wife, the illness, the struggle, the loss. He didn't reveal everything, but enough for her to glimpse the abyss that separated him from his former world. He spoke with the simplicity of someone who had nothing left to hide. He expected rejection, disgust to be pushed away. But that's not what happened. Sophia listened attentively, her eyes fixed on his, full of genuine compassion. It wasn't the condescending pity of the rich, but a deep empathy that seemed to transcend the barriers of their opposing realities. She offered no words of comfort, but her presence, her attentive listening, was a balm for Mark's wounded soul. The rain continued to fall, but the cold seemed less intense now. The shelter, once a symbol of his loneliness, was now a shared space, a refuge from the storm and perhaps from the loneliness that imprisoned them both. However, looking at Sophia's tired face, Mark noticed a detail that disturbed him. A single tear rolled down her cheek, mingling with the raindrops falling on her face. He realized then that her pain, behind the elegance and wealth, was as deep as his own. And for the first time in a long time he felt a faint thread of hope, but also a deep unease. What would happen when the rain stopped? The silence that followed the rain was heavier than the storm itself. Mark watched Sophia, the single tear still marking her flawless skin. The image contrasted brutally with the opulence of her clothes, creating a strange and moving dissonance. He remembered his own wife, her pale skin in her final days, the fragility the illness had imposed. A familiar sharp pang of pain struck him. "I'm sorry," Sophia murmured, her voice low as a whisper. "I shouldn't have let myself get carried away." Mark shook his head, his throat dry. "It's okay. Everyone has their, stories." He hesitated, the memory of his wife suffocating him. It was as if, with each word, he relived the agony of loss. But something in Sophia's sadness, in her sudden vulnerability, impelled him to share his own pain. He began to speak, his voice hoarse, the words coming out like loose stones from a dry riverbed. He told her about his wife, about the love that bound them, about the desperate fight against the disease, about the bankruptcy that had swallowed him whole. He told her about the anguish of watching her leave, about the emptiness her absence had left. He spoke of the weight of guilt, of the failure to save her, of the failure to be a good husband, a good man. The tears, held back for so long, finally broke through. Sophia didn't interrupt. She just listened, her gaze fixed on Mark's wrinkled face, her own eyes glistening with tears. When he finished, a heavy silence hung between them, broken only by the soft sound of the rain lessening. Then Sophia spoke, her voice trembling. "My son, he was 5. An accident, a car." She couldn't finish the sentence, the pain choking her. The image of the elegant, powerful woman crumbled, revealing the fragility of a mother who had lost everything. She told him about the empty life she had led since then, about the work that consumed her but didn't fulfill her, about the loneliness that surrounded her, even amidst wealth and luxury, about the incessant search for something, anything that could fill the void left by the loss of her son, a search that led her to an endless cycle of work and isolation. Mark looked at her, seeing in her eyes the same despair that haunted him, the same pain, the same loneliness. It was as if they were looking at each other in a distorted mirror, reflecting the dark shadows of loss, but also a faint glimmer of mutual understanding. The rain finally stopped. The morning sun, weak and hesitant, began to break through the clouds. A new day dawned, and with it, an unusual sense of hope, mixed with a deep fear, the fear that the sunlight might reveal the extent of the darkness that still surrounded them. The timid morning sun illuminated the weary faces of those sleeping in the shelter. Mark watched Sophia, sitting apart, her slender fingers tracing invisible patterns in the dust on the floor. The fragility she had revealed the previous night still hung in the air, a thin veil over her usual elegance. He approached, hesitating. "Did you sleep well?" he asked, his voice hoarse from sleep and the extinguished cigarette between his fingers. Sophia looked up, a slight smile on her lips. "The city noise is a good cure for insomnia," she replied, her voice low, like a whisper. A comfortable silence settled between them, filled only by the sounds of life pulsing around them. Mark observed the way the sunlight touched her face, highlighting the delicacy of her features, contrasting with the contained strength in her gaze. "I think I've never seen anyone so alone amidst so many people," Mark said, the words escaping before he could think. Sophia wasn't surprised. "And you, Mark, you also seem to carry a huge weight." The question was more of a statement than an inquiry. He sighed, sitting down beside her. "I lost my wife 3 years ago. The illness, yes, took everything. My job, my house, and everything." The pain, old and familiar, returned with force, but this time it wasn't a monster that swallowed him whole. It was a painful memory, but a shared one. Sophia gently touched his hand, a simple gesture but laden with deep understanding. "I'm so sorry," she said, her voice choked. "I also lost someone, my son, 10 years ago." The tears she had suppressed for so long began to flow. Mark didn't comfort her with words. He just kept his hand over hers, a silent gesture of solidarity. In the shared silence, a connection formed between them, an invisible bond woven with threads of pain, of loss, and of nascent hope. He told her about life on the streets, about the daily struggle for survival, about the loneliness that corroded him. And she, in turn, confessed the empty solidity of her wealth, the void that no luxury could fill. The conversation flowed naturally, like a current breaking down the barriers built over the years. Watching the children playing in the shelter's courtyard, Sophia smiled. a genuine smile that illuminated her face and warmed Mark's heart. He had never seen anything so beautiful. "They remind me," she began, her voice faltering slightly. "They remind me of what I lost." He squeezed her hand gently. "You haven't lost everything," Mark said, his voice firm. "There's still time." Afternoon approached, painting the sky with shades of orange and purple. The rain of hope that had begun to fall the previous night seemed to have transformed into a sun of promise. They looked at each other, and in Sophia's eyes, Mark saw a glimmer of gratitude and something more, something that made him nervous and hopeful at the same time, a glimmer of attraction. Before he could speak, a child's cry interrupted the moment, but the electricity in the air, the promise of something new, lingered. Fear and hope mingled in his heart, a sensation as intense as the pain of his loss. The sun began to set, painting the sky with vibrant colors, when the silence of the shelter was broken by the distant rumble of engines. 4 imposing black cars pulled up on the dusty street, their headlights cutting through the twilight. Mark felt a tightness in his chest, a chill that had nothing to do with the evening breeze. Sophia, sitting beside him, seemed to notice the change in his expression. "They've come for me," she said, her voice soft, almost a whisper, but her eyes shone, not with joy, but with a strange mixture of apprehension and relief. Mark stared at the cars, anger rising like a tide. The image of Sophia, elegant amidst that poverty, unsettled him. Her kindness, the connection that had sprung up between them, seemed as improbable as the rain that had brought hope to that community. Doubt gnawed at him. Was it all an act, a social experiment, with him as the subject? You were expecting them?" he asked, his voice hoarse. She hesitated, looking at the children playing in the yard, their laughter echoing in the quiet twilight. I don't know quite how to explain." "Explain what?" "Explain how you, a woman like you, appears in my life, pretends to care, and then disappears again." The anger exploded, cutting the air like lightning. He stood up, the chair creaking under his weight. Sophia also stood, her impeccable posture seeming to unravel slightly. The fragility he had glimpsed before was now more evident, like a crack in the facade of an imposing building. "It's not like that, Mark. Please understand me." "Understand? How can I understand? You came here to a place where no one from your life would ever set foot, and now, black cars, impassive drivers. It's an insult, you know. It's a slap in the face to all of us." He gestured towards the shelter, the community that had become his unlikely family. Sophia opened her mouth to reply, but Mark interrupted her, his voice harder than ever. "Go away, Sophia. Go away and take your black cars and your lies with you. I don't need your charity. I don't need your compassion." Tears glistened in her eyes, but she didn't cry. She just looked at him, the pain in her gaze as deep as his own. Then, without a word, she turned and walked towards the cars, her elegant figure disappearing into the encroaching darkness. Mark watched her go, a cold emptiness settling in his chest, deeper than any pain he had ever felt. The rain of hope had stopped, and he felt more alone than ever. The silence of the mansion was deafening. Sophia drowned in it, an ocean of silk and marble that suffocated her. The impeccable decor, once a symbol of success, was now a cruel reflection of her loneliness. The family portraits, smiles frozen in perfect poses, seemed to mock her unhappiness. She had returned to her life, to the opulence that had defined her for so long, but the opulence didn't fill her. On the contrary, it made her feel even emptier. The image of Mark, the anger in his eyes, the dignity in his posture, even in misery, echoed in her mind. Her charity, she thought bitterly, had been as useless as a fake jewel. She had tried to help, but her attempts had been clumsy, awkward, as out of place as a diamond in a pile of trash. She tried to read, to watch television, but nothing held her attention. With every chime of a bell, every silent step of a servant, she felt more trapped in her gilded cage. The memory of the shelter, the smell of simple food and the warmth of the community, was a painful contrast to the glacial chill of her own home. The genuine joy of those people, the solidarity amidst adversity, something she had forgotten, existed. She picked up the phone, hesitant. She needed to know, she needed to understand. Dialing the number of a social service, which she knew had contact with the shelter, seemed to be the only way to calm the unrest that gnawed at her. The voice on the other end confirmed her worst suspicions. Mark was worse, more withdrawn, more silent. Her departure had been a blow to the fragile foundation of hope that she, unwittingly, had built. Guilt hit her like a punch in the stomach. She hadn't just abandoned a man, She had abandoned the small community he had built for himself. She had left behind the glimmer of hope that bloomed in that miserable place. The news that he was more unhappy because of her departure hit her hard. It wasn't just guilt. It was the terrible realization of her own insignificance, her millions, her influence, her glamour. Everything was useless in the face of the loneliness that consumed her and the pain she had caused Mark and that small community. Suddenly, the opulence of her house became an unbearable weight, a symbol of everything she had lost and everything she had left behind. The rain of hope, which she had glimpsed in Mark's eyes, had turned into a storm of remorse in her own heart. She needed to go back, not to offer more money, but to apologize, to try to fix what she had broken. But would it be too late? The doubt, cold and sharp, pierced her. The doubt and the terrible certainty that the loneliness, which she thought she had left behind at the shelter, followed her like a shadow, now darker and more menacing than ever. The Mexico City sun beat down on Mark's face, but he barely noticed. His calloused, grease-stained hands gripped the screwdriver tighter than necessary. He was repairing an old radio, another discarded item he would transform into something useful. The painfully familiar routine kept him trapped in his shell of solitude. The memory of Sophia, the woman who had offered him money and left him so deeply hurt, still haunted him. But something had changed. Her visit, the way she had observed the community, the flicker of remorse in her eyes, it had planted a seed of doubt in his hardened heart. He heard a car approaching, its powerful engine cutting through the city noise. It wasn't just any car. It was the kind of car only rich people drove. His heart pounded, a bad feeling washing over him. He braced himself for humiliation, for another display of superficial compassion. But what he saw was Sophia stepping out of a luxurious car, but with a different expression. It wasn't the arrogant, distant look he remembered, but a mixture of nervousness and fragility. "Mark," she said, her voice hesitant. She seemed small, almost frail, in front of his makeshift workshop. Her impeccable clothes, so contrasting with his own unkempt appearance, couldn't hide the vulnerability in her eyes. Mark stared at her for a long moment, silent. He expected an apology, a justification, something to explain her flight, but she said nothing. She just observed the shelter residents, children playing, adults talking, an atmosphere of community he had almost forgotten. Sophia broke the silence, her voice low and husky. I need to apologize. I was insensitive, arrogant. I didn't understand." She pulled an envelope from her purse. "This isn't charity, Mark. It's an investment. I want to build a workshop for you, a real workshop. Mark Motors." Mark was speechless. The proposal was so unexpected, so different from what he expected, that for a moment he thought he was dreaming. The idea of a workshop, a place of his own, a space to work and rebuild himself, hit him like a ray of sunshine on a cloudy day. It was a chance, a second opportunity. He looked at the children playing, at the friendly faces of the shelter residents, the community he had found in his pain, the community Sophia had witnessed and perhaps finally understood. He looked at Sophia. Her vulnerability, her evident inner struggle, was as palpable as the grime under his fingernails. He saw the woman behind the wealth, the pain behind the forced smile. He saw the hope behind the remorse. He took a deep breath, the cool morning air filling his lungs. "I accept," he said, his voice hoarse but firm. A weak, hesitant smile appeared on his lips. It was a smile of hope, a smile of redemption, but deep down a question lingered. Could trust once lost ever be regained? The rain of hope finally seemed to be arriving, but the sky was still heavy with clouds. Mark's condition was clear, a loan, not charity. Sophia nodded, her expression serious, but her eyes shone with a relief he recognized as familiar. He saw her truly for the first time, not the wealthy woman, impeccably dressed, but a person battling her own ghosts. Signing the papers was an almost surreal act. The smell of ink and paper, the cool pen in his hand, contrasted with the growing warmth in his chest. A hesitant hope, but real. The workshop, once a solitary and dusty workspace, was transformed. Sophia, with her tireless energy, organized the space, brought in new, shiny tools. Mark, initially withdrawn, watched in silence, his calloused hands resting on the steering wheel of an old car, a reflection of his past. But gradually he let himself get involved. The conversations were short at first, punctuated by long, comfortable silences. They talked about work, about cars, about the city, about superficial things, but the connection was palpable. One day, while cleaning an engine, Sophia asked, "Do you still miss her?" The question, direct and simple, hit him like a punch. He hesitated, his eyes welling up. The weight of the loss, until then contained, threatened to overflow. He lowered his head, his voice hoarse. "Every day, but it's getting lighter." He couldn't explain it, but her presence, her ability to be there, without judgment, without excessive pity, was a balm. Sophia didn't answer immediately. She simply reached out, placing her hand lightly on his. The touch was brief, but laden with a silent, profound understanding. It was as if she had crossed an invisible barrier, touching not only his hand, but his soul. In that simple gesture, he saw not only compassion, but a genuine connection, an unexpected and vital friendship. At night, at the shelter, the atmosphere was festive. The children sang, the adults laughed, sharing simple food. Mark watched the scene, feeling a warmth that came not only from the fire heating the place, but from a deep sense of belonging. He saw Sophia watching too, a slight smile on her lips. She approached and whispered, "It's beautiful, isn't it?" He nodded, the words stuck in his throat, confused and wonderful emotions flooding him. It was more than a workshop, more than a loan. It was a new beginning, but the doubt persisted, a shadow in the growing light of hope. Could trust once broken be completely rebuilt? The future was still uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, Mark felt he had the right to dream. He looked at Sophia, and in the depths of her eyes he saw the same fear, the same hope, the same yearning for a new beginning. And in that shared gaze, in that mutual vulnerability, he found a strength he never knew he possessed. The rain of hope, though still intermittent, was finally beginning to wash the dust from his soul. But a new storm was brewing on the horizon, the reappearance of an old enemy, someone who threatened to destroy everything he had so painstakingly rebuilt. 3 months. 3 months of sweat, of calloused hands that refused to tremble, of hopeful looks on the faces of the shelter residents who now had a place to repair their bicycles, their market carts, their small sewing machines. The workshop, a makeshift shed but full of life, was a resounding success. The smell of grease and hot metal mingled with the aroma of fresh coffee, a perfume of hope that scented the air. Mark, his hands still stained with oil, smiled, a genuine smile reaching his tired but bright eyes. He had found purpose, a rhythm, a reason to get out of bed every morning. Sophia came every day, not as a billionaire observing a charity project, but as a friend, a partner, a colleague. She learned to change a light bulb, tighten a screw, read the sound of a tired engine. And Mark learned to trust, to open up, to let his armor of cynicism crumble little by little. The shelter community embraced Sophia, charmed by her simplicity and generosity. The children adored her, her frank smiles breaking down the barrier of formality she carried. One night, after the last client had left and the silence of the city had invaded the workshop, Mark and Sophia were alone. The air was thick with a comfortable silence, punctuated by the soft sound of the rain falling outside. Mark wiped his hands on an old rag and looked at Sophia. She was sitting on a stool, watching the flames dance in the makeshift fireplace. "It's all so different," she said, her soft voice gently breaking the quiet. Mark nodded, feeling a lump in his throat. It's good. It's good to be alive again." Sophia turned, her eyes meeting his. The light of the dancing fire reflected in her pupils, revealing a depth of emotion that left him breathless. She approached slowly, the space between them diminishing. "You saved me, Mark," she confessed, her voice low, almost a whisper. "You showed me that happiness isn't in having everything, but in sharing what you have." The words hit him like a punch to the stomach. He loved her. He loved her strength, her vulnerability, her ability to find beauty in the midst of adversity. He loved the way she could see the best in people, even in the worst circumstances, and he knew, in that moment, that he had to say it. "Sophia," he began, his voice hoarse with emotion, "I love you. I want to spend the rest of my life with you." He pulled a small velvet box from his pocket, worn with time but containing a simple silver ring, a ring he'd found amidst a pile of scrap, a ring that somehow seemed to perfectly represent the journey they had shared. Tears streamed down Sophia's face, a mixture of joy and relief. She nodded, unable to speak, her eyes fixed on his. He slipped the ring onto her finger, the cool metal touching her warm skin. At that moment the rain outside intensified, but to Mark it felt like a rain of hope, a rain of love, a rain of a new beginning. A new beginning that he knew wouldn't be without challenges, but that for the first time in a long time he would face with courage, with love, and with the certainty that he wasn't alone. But as he embraced her, feeling the warmth of her body against his, a shiver ran down his spine. He saw a black car parked across the street, and a familiar man, a shadowy face from his past, watching them from the darkness. The reign of hope, it seemed, was now threatened by a new storm. Sophia's car, a gleaming Mercedes, seemed out of place in the small cemetery. Mark, still uneasy with the luxury surrounding her, felt her hand on his arm, a gentle gesture that soothed him. The grave was simple, a small marble headstone with Miguel's name delicately engraved. Sophia knelt, her hands trembling as she touched the cold stone. The silence was heavy, broken only by the distant sound of Mexico City traffic. Mark watched her, his eyes brimming. He had never known Miguel, but he felt Sophia's pain as if it were his own. He understood the loss, the searing pain that left a scar on the soul. He remembered Laura, his wife, and a wave of sadness hit him, so strong it nearly doubled him over. Sophia took a deep breath, her shoulders trembling slightly. "He was perfect," she whispered, her voice hoarse with emotion, "so full of life." The memory of her son seemed to consume her, the pain as palpable as the cold stone beneath her fingers. Mark knelt beside her, not knowing what to say. Words seemed futile in the face of such grief. He reached out and gently touched her shoulder, a simple gesture, but laden with compassion and understanding. He knew loneliness, the pain of irreparable loss. He knew what it was to feel the world crumble. Sophia turned to him, her eyes swollen and red, but with a glimmer of gratitude. "Thank you, Mark," she said, her voice still trembling. "Thank you for being here." At that moment, the rain began to fall again, light and steady, as if the sky were weeping with them. Mark pulled Sophia into a tight embrace, and she let herself be held, without resistance, without reservation. It was a hug that transcended words, a hug that healed old wounds, a hug that sealed an unexpected but profoundly true union. The rain washed away their tears, cleansing the dust of pain and loneliness. It was a rain of hope, a rain that washed away not only their tears, but also the cynicism that had so imprisoned him. As they separated, a weak but genuine smile touched Sophia's lips. She seemed lighter, the burden of her pain lessened, even if not eliminated. Mark also felt a deep relief. He had found a purpose, a meaning amidst his own pain, a meaning that transcended loneliness and poverty. But as the two watched the rain fall on Miguel's grave, an intense beam of light from the headlights of a black car cut through the atmosphere. Mark recognized the vehicle, and a chill ran down his spine. It was the same car that had watched him the previous day. The shadowy man he so feared was back. The reign of hope, once again, seemed threatened. The newly found peace turned into apprehension, and the feeling of danger hung in the air, cold and relentless, like the cold metal of the ring on his finger.